1999 The Podcast is a production of the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more podcasts on movies, comics, and all things pop culture, head to cageclub.me. To contact us with questions, comments, or just to say hi, send us an email at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find me on Twitter at probablyrealjb and Joey at soulpopped. And you can follow the show on Twitter at 1999 The Podcast. To support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. The show is written, produced, and edited by us. Welcome to 1999, the podcast. I am John Brooks.
And I'm Joey Lewandowski. John, I'm very excited that our arbitrary ordering of this round of movies puts a semi-spooky movie in spooky season.
Yeah, and I played with the idea because we're going to have a episode come out on Halloween that is not a spooky
Which is
movie.
Honestly about the scariest topic of all.
Well, it's kind of true. And I thought, like, is it better to have this one come out like leading up to Halloween or on Halloween? Because it's weird when it's like on the day of that we have an episode coming out. But
maybe this is a better question for next episode. But what were you doing on Halloween in 1999? Do you remember it?
Oh God.
Because you were in Seattle, probably.
Was I? No, I would have been in. Oh wait, where was I? No, I'd have been in college. So I was in Ithaca.
Do you want to think about this for 2 weeks and get back to me?
I was in Ithaca, and I don't remember anything about Halloween of that year. I don't think I did a lot of Halloween stuff when I was in college, really, except for like Rocky Horror sometimes. But like,
wait, what year in school were you?
So it was a little confusing because it was technically like my first full year of college, but I'd already done a bunch of college at community college before I went to 4-year college. So I graduated high school in 97. And then I just kind of did some stuff for a while, like in Seattle, and like took some classes. And so I transferred to Ithaca in January of 99.
So you should have been like a junior, but you were...
I should have been a sophomore, but I was like a mega freshman or something. Kind of like that, right? Like I was a freshman with a bunch of credits, basically.
So your episode of Hard to Believe about how you're taking like 3 decades to do a master's is par for the course for you.
This is a little bit longer, and it's 2 decades. It'll be almost exactly 20 years.
You just love school.
I do love school. I work at a school. I do school all the time. It's all I do is school. No, I don't remember that. I don't remember that Halloween.
What grade would I have been in? Oh boy.
Oh no, I do remember. I went to a party, and some girl threw up my shoes, and that's all I remember about it. But yeah, that's pretty much like par for the course for Halloween stuff. It wasn't like
I would have been 6th grade Halloween, so I definitely was trick or treating. I don't know who I was that year. Maybe I'll find out. Come back in 2 weeks. Maybe I'll have the answer. I probably won't.
Maybe. Well, anyway, I thought it'd be fun to do this one as it lined up because it gives us time to people can spend the next couple weeks listening to a Halloween sort of ish themed episode of the show. And then when Halloween happens, they'll be able to start November 1st with a completely new sort of kind of an episode that is not Halloween-y. Anyway, we're beating around the bush.
Halloween on a Monday this year is terrible, though. That's bad, right?
It is. Yeah. I don't like Monday Halloweens. That's kind of stupid.
Oh, Garfield.
Although there is nothing scarier than a Monday for Garfield. Anyway, today...
Sounds like someone's got a case of the Mondays.
Oh, by the way, it's my anniversary today. Isn't that exciting?
Wait, today as we're recording or today as this comes out?
And speak today as we're recording. And speaking of which, it is my In Line for Spooky season 13th anniversary.
Ooh, happy anniversary in the present and also in the past by the time this comes out and you edit it.
I've seen my wife for all of 45 minutes today, which is great.
Yeah, but that's what being married with 3 kids is like, right?
30 of which was watching the first episode of season 2 of Only Murders in the Building. And the other half was like fighting with our kids about cake.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, happy anniversary, Courtney. Etc.
Does she listen to the show?
She does.
Cool.
She was very happy that the most recent episode had 2 Courtney call-outs, so she gets another one today, and love you very much. Would do it all over again.
But what more could you want? You don't need an anniversary gift. You get shouted out on this podcast.
And a card. All right. We are fast forwarding just ever so slightly from our last episode, 2 weeks after election on May 7th, in what may well be the first summer movie of that season, although I know technically, according to the trade magazines or whatever, the movie season starts on Memorial Day. This is a little bit before it, but it definitely has a summer movie kind of resume going into it. This movie managed to get a 12-day jump on The Phantom Menace, which proved fruitful because rather than being buried deep in the sand, get that pun, it made a lot of money. Like a lot of money. Today's movie stars Brendan Fraser.
Fraser, not Frazier. If you say Frazier, I know where you live.
Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Jonathan Hyde, Kevin J. O'Connor, Oded Fehr, and the second Dark Man himself, the great Arnold Vosloo. Written and directed by Stephen Sommers and based on the Universal monster movie classic of the same name. Today, we are talking about, just in time for spooky season, The Mummy. Joey.
Yep.
What's The Mummy about?
I made notes of this because, as I think it's been brought up on the pod before, I've not seen this movie before this week, so this was new to me. So I made notes to remember because there's a lot that goes on. So if this sounds wrong, feel free to jump in and correct me. Tom Cruise plays an army soldier named Nick Morton. Who discovers the tomb of Princess...
You watched the wrong movie. No, don't.
I've seen that one twice.
I'm sure you have. I was going to ask you about that later on, but...
we'll get to it. Okay.
Yeah.
For real now.
Yep.
Start in ancient Egypt, where there's a high priest who's having an affair with the pharaoh's wife or girlfriend or mistress or someone. They kill the pharaoh. She sacrifices herself, knowing the high priest can resurrect her. But as he tries to do that, the pharaoh's bodyguards stop him, kill him, and mummify him while he's still alive. We then go to the 1920s in Egypt, where two British rich siblings, played by Rachel Weisz and some guy whose name you just said, but I don't recognize, I'm so sorry,
John Hannah,
are looking for the city of the dead. They team up with Brendan Gleeson,
Fraser,
who they break out of prison, who the brother stole the box map key thing from to find the city. They then face off against a bunch of American treasure hunters who look like hipsters from Brooklyn. They press on like they're Indiana Jones and come away with some treasure, but then Rachel Weisz reads from the Book of the Dead, awakening the high priest, our titular mummy. Things break bad in a number of ways, like a bunch of zombies come after them. The high priest, Imhotep, wants to use Rachel Weisz to resurrect his long-dead girlfriend. They all fight back, use the Book of Amun-Ra to make Imhotep mortal and kill him, and then they all, except for Benny, live happily ever after.
Very nice.
Because I realize the error of my ways that when a story sounds simple, I have a problem communicating it. And when a story is complex, I can do it very easily. And this one, I'm like, there's just a lot of historical... when Mike and I did Tom Club for Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise, speaking the other mummy, I would do the Tom Cruise movies and he would do the Tom Hanks movies.
Yeah. Because
that's just how we broke it down. And so a Tom Hanks movie, he gets stranded on an island and he has to get back. And then Tom Cruise is like, all right, it's Mission Impossible 3. There's 18 moving pieces. There's these people over here. And it's like the whole world is that, but it's not this world, but it's that world. It's just I can't have a simple plot summary. So,
Okay, Brendan Gleeson's not in this movie. So who are you talking about?
Did I say Brendan Gleeson?
Yeah.
Brendan Fraser.
Fraser, not Frazier.
Did I write? Hold on. Did I write down Brendan Gleeson or did I write down Brendan Fraser? What did I write down? What did I say?
Yeah. Aside from the star of the movie, you got pretty much all of that right.
Hold on.
People confuse Brendan Gleeson and Brendan Fraser all the time. Let's,
I wrote down Brendan Gleeson. I was just wrong.
I was wondering. I thought maybe that was some kind of joke that I wasn't getting.
No. The only joke that I meant was the Tom Cruise one.
Yes,
the other one was
that was very
me being
joke.
dumb. That was me writing plot summary while watching the movie.
Aside from you routinely get the year that we're covering wrong. So the fact that you get the literal star of the movie wrong is sort of par for the course. But no, good summary.
Thank you.
In the end, -5 points for. I wish Brendan Gleeson was in this movie. I wanted him to be in every movie, but he's not, and that's how it goes. Anyway. Love you, Brendan Gleeson, and your sons. You're all great. The story of the Mummy remake is about as convoluted a story as the movie itself, as you just pointed out. In short, it spans about a decade and involved would-be writer and director names like George A. Romero, Clive Barker, Joe Dante, John Sayles, and Wes Craven in a series of starts and stops that had the movie taking place in all kinds of different time periods and all kinds of different genres before it finally landed at the feet of Sommers, who had directed a series of mid-budget so-so fare like Deep Rising, Tom and Huck, and probably most successfully the critically praised 1994 adaptation of The Jungle Book starring Jason Scott Lee, which is a pretty good movie if you've never seen it. In 1996, Universal asked Tombstone writer the late Kevin Jarre to take a crack at the script, and it is Jarre's vision of an epic blockbuster set at the height of Egyptological exploration that would form the basis of Summers' finished project. But Summers brought an enthusiasm for classic adventure films, both tonally and aesthetically, to the project, citing both Indiana Jones and Jason and the Argonauts as inspirations, which, as it turns out, is a pretty great way to explain the aesthetic of The Mummy. Summers was also a big fan of Universal horror. For more of that, check out The Monsters That Made Us here on the Cage Club Podcast Network. And many of the aesthetic tropes associated with those films are on display here as well, which we can talk about later on in the episode. Anyway, somehow it worked. The Mummy cost an estimated $80 million to make, and it opened at $43 million, earning over $155 million domestically and almost $416 million worldwide, not including Joey, who did not go to see The Mummy until very recently.
It got my $3.99 or whatever. I thought it was on Peacock. It's not on Peacock.
It should have. I figured it would be on Peacock too. It's on right now. It's on like TNT every 5 minutes. But yeah, if you want to get it on.
When I looked on Just Watch, it's on. It says Peacock Premium, and there's like a landing page where you can't click play. So like I think it was there recently, or it's been on there before. But I had to pony up a couple bucks to watch this movie.
I watched it on FX or TNT or USA, or one of those channels that just shows random movies over and over again, like 2 weeks ago. So I didn't. And I've already seen it a bunch of times. So anyway, with that kind of earning, it of course earned a sequel, The Mummy Returns, famous for being the brief film debut of one Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, pertinent to your interests, Joey.
Yes, sir.
A spin-off featuring Johnson's character, the Scorpion King, an animated series, and a second sequel with little attachment to the original beyond Fraser and Summers, that has its fans, but is generally not considered part of the core Mummy fandom. In many ways, The Mummy is the last great special effects blockbuster. Its aesthetic is deliberately aggressively old school, evoking the stop-motion techniques of Ray Harryhausen's Skeleton Army and Jason and the Argonauts 1 minute, and state-of-the-art CGI the next, all while combining on-location vistas with soundstage sets, matte paintings, and old-school practical effects wizardry. It feels like a movie that was made by hand in a way we just don't see anymore. And that really, like, the most recent time I watched it really stuck out to me. It's the mixture of different effect styles that you just don't get in today's put it in front of a green screen and let these artists like make the world around it movie, which, look, it's not a problem. Like,
that's weird. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think I was either going to bring it up here or in the actual episode itself, but like, it's weird that I wasn't sure if the effects were meant to look bad or if they just didn't care that it looked bad. You know what I mean? Like, it was just kind of like, is this dated and aged poorly, or they always knew it was going to be weird? Because like, it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
And I want to give things the benefit of the doubt, but I'm just like, ooh, I don't know.
I think some of the CGI was, again, this is pre The Phantom Menace, where CGI takes its next leap.
Well, by 2 weeks or 12 days.
Yes,
or whatever, right?
But they didn't have the benefit of like working from the technology. I mean, ILM worked on this movie, but it didn't have the benefit of working from the technological breakthroughs that The Phantom Menace allowed. So you always have to look at CGI effects like pre and post Phantom Menace. I think that's just a good sort of like, metric, right? There's like post Jurassic Park and then post Phantom Menace as your kind of two, I think,
sure,
your two benchmarks. But no, there's something deliberate, I think, about the way that some of the effects are kind of, sort of disjointed, and like some of the movements of the Mummy himself are very sort of like Ray Harryhausen, and there's something about the sort of like the matte painting stuff that just has this classic Hollywood adventure film sort of feel that you just don't get when you have a realistic CGI green screen background. So yeah, I think the answer is kind of both. Like, like part of it's an aesthetic choice, and some of the CGI is just like, well, who cares? Like, it's a Mummy movie. Who gives a shit if it's like perfectly, believable or not?
Yeah, I think yes. So I was talking to friends about watching this movie, and we were talking briefly about the Tom Cruise thing, and like they're like, one friend said that one should have been set back in time. I'm like, they already did that. So like, I think that if you're doing a remake, just kind of do what you want to do,
right?
And like let it be how it plays out.
Yeah.
And if people like it, cool. If people don't like it, don't. Like, that's fine too. But like, I like when people take a swing or they do their thing. And even if I don't like it, I'd rather have something new and different than the same thing just with like made 60 years later or whatever.
Sure. Anyway, critics were not necessarily on board with the audience sort of rapturous reaction to The Mummy, although many seem to have gotten what Summers was going for here. It has a 61% critic score with 101 reviews and a 75% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And on Metacritic, it has a 48 critic score and an 8.7 audience score, which is quite a disparity. Entertainment Weekly's Owen Gleiberman gave the film a B- and wrote, quote, Fraser's attitude of blithe fearlessness is matched by that of his sidekick/love interest Rachel Weisz, a rosy, ringlet-haired Egyptologist who, when threatened with abduction, admonishes Rick, quote, think fast, because if he turns me into a mummy, you're the first one I'm coming after. The movie doesn't take anything seriously, not even its title demon. Roger Ebert gave The Mummy 3 stars and began his review by writing, quote, there is within me an unslaked hunger for preposterous adventure movies. I resist the bad ones, but when a Congo or an anaconda comes along, my heart leaps up and I cave in. The Mummy is a movie like that. The biggest fan among critics was the San Francisco Chronicle's Bob Graham, who wrote, quote, this comic horror movie emphasizes the comic, and Brendan Fraser is in his element. With his exaggerated features, big eyes, big nose, big lips, Fraser already looks like a comic book hero. More importantly, he's got the flair and know-how to bring it off. The Mummy digs up both laughs and chills from time-worn material. Of the lukewarm receptions was TV Guide magazine's Maitland McDonough, who called the movie, quote, noisy, spectacular, and disposable. And for good measure, among the true haters, the Washington Post's Stephen Hunter, who called The Mummy, quote, fast and furious. I thought you'd like that one, Joey. Shallow, empty, casually racist, merry, jaunty, silly, and utterly weightless.
Wow.
Yeah. So I can't find any review of this movie that is like, it's boring and bad. Even the bad reviews seem to have this sort of like, I don't know, begrudging sort of admiration for the movie's big swing, right?
Sure.
Which I think is, even people who I think are sort of like so-so on this movie are like, I admire how big Stephen Sommers goes. I've always admired how big Stephen Sommers goes. I mean, I'm also a fan of Van Helsing, which
he may have been. That was the elephant in the room.
Right.
That movie stinks. I think
it's bad. It's a really bad movie. But like, I went to go see it like one like hungover hot afternoon in New York City, and I just had a great fucking time.
It's talk about big swings. Like he's just like throwing everything at every wall, right? So,
and there's something to be said for that. Just like going absolutely fucking balls out all in the way that movie does, and just does not care that it is completely absurd and makes no goddamn sense. Because you have like Van Helsing fighting Draculas and mummies and Frankensteins and like all sorts of weird shit. And it's fucking great. I mean, there again, it's the kind of movie that they just do not release in theaters anymore, and there's something, you know, sort of lamentable about that. But anyway, much of the negative reception from critics seems to be attributable to the fact that this was by design a movie absolutely out of its time, and many may not have realized that this movie asked them to be in on the joke. And this can happen when you watch and review several movies a day. It's something we've kind of talked about before. But regardless, the movie is beloved, and you've heard more than one person on this show cite it as a 1999 favorite. And the very first person to do so is today's guest. And Joey, who is that?
Our guest today is the second returning guest to 1999 the podcast.
Oh, his name is Brian what?
His name is Brian Christopher Kluwe, former punter for the Minnesota Vikings, author, nerd guy. I don't know. I'm doing this poorly and well, I think.
NFL legend.
NFL legend.
Yeah.
And he's a sparkle pony.
True.
Actually, not a sparkle pony, just the coiner of the term sparkle pony.
If you go back and listen to the Matrix episode, Chris said he'd be on this episode. He's going to be on this episode, and we will be right back with Chris to talk about The Mummy, parentheses, 1999. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
You know what I realized about these episodes of Chris is that we only talk with him about movies where strange bugs crawl under dude's skin.
Oh, you found the
Yes.
similarity. Good job.
I wasn't looking for it, but I saw it. I'm
Yeah.
like, where have I? Oh, The Matrix, of course. And then I was just like, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
Scare beetles.
I'm now seeing The Matrix through the code.
We're going to cut all the soccer stuff out, by the way, but I was laughing in case anybody's wondering because we just spent 8 minutes talking about soccer. No. America's not ready for it, Chris. They're not ready for an 8-minute soccer conversation.
John, remember that conversation we were having about bonus stuff? Like that's what people are going to want. They're going to want.
Yeah.
They're going to
join
want
our Patreon for 8 minutes of me and Chris just talking random soccer shit that you're not going to care
breaking down
about.
the issues of the U.S. soccer and the MLS.
Because Joey asked something about whether or not he ever played in London.
Wholly unrelated. Yep.
Wholly unrelated. Chris, you, in our very first episode about The Matrix, we asked the question that we have been asking all of our guests, which is what their favorite 1999 movie is, and you said The Mummy. And you were not alone, by the way. A lot of people have said that in the meantime, but I offered to invite you back to talk about The Mummy when we got to it, and it is now October and spooky season, and it is time to talk about The Mummy. So welcome back. Joey had never seen this movie until recently.
That is
He's
correct.
going to have some interesting thoughts about it. But we will start with you. Why do you love this movie so much? And do you remember the first time that you saw it?
Yeah, so the reason why I love this movie so much is because Brendan Fraser is like a horrendously underrated actor. not just in terms of like acting ability, but also like physical comedy. Like the way he moves his body around, especially in this movie, it's amazing. And then the second part is that it really feels like a cutoff point between I don't know if it's the right way to phrase it, but almost like the golden age of Hollywood, right? Where you had these it's like Indiana Jones, right? And the action adventure movies where you know what you're looking at is ridiculous, but you're so bought into the concept that you're like, this movie is fantastic. Like, I have been transported to another world. This is really fun to watch. And like, I'm not expecting a big life lesson out of this. It's just, this is pure escapism. And like, for me, I can't think of many or any movies after The Mummy that like really capture that same sort of feel of like, you could watch The Mummy in the 70s, 60s, 50s probably and be like, yeah, that fits. But afterwards, like if The Mummy came out today, you'd have people watching and being like, what is this nonsense?
Like Joey. Yeah.
Yeah. Right? So
Yeah.
it really feels like a cutoff point where it's like this was the last gasp of, Turner Classic Movie Channel. And it was on the big screen. And so, yeah, no, I saw it I remember I saw it in the theater with my friends, and like, I think, God, we were like 17 or 18 at the time, and like, we loved it. It was great. This was amazing. But I can see how a 17 or 18-year-old seeing it today would compare it to something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and be like, boring, what's next? and I think that's kind of a shame, because there is something to be said for those old films.
So, yeah, what you're saying there is a lot of what I said in the intro, which is that there's something about this movie that marks an ending of a kind of effects spectacle that you don't get anymore, where you can really kind of feel and see the work that goes into it and the different sort of techniques that are used to like create the special effects. There's something very kind of not just throwbacky, but very kind of handmade about this movie that you just don't get anymore. And I wonder, like, everything else you said about it being, this kind of almost throwback to like Indiana Jones, or even the movies that inspired Indiana Jones in the first place, right? Did you get that then? Like, when you were watching it, I think even in 99, this movie's a little bit weirdly out of place, but did you get when you were watching it that it is also kind of an homage to something that is like a bygone era?
Yeah, so I will say my childhood was probably not the ordinary childhood where I saw the African Queen a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really reminded me of that. Where for those unfamiliar, that's is Humphrey Bogart, right?
Yep.
It's and like they're taking this ship up the river, and it's just a classic black and white Hollywood movie. There's drama, like there's the big finale, but like it for whatever reason, it really reminded me of that. Like
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I saw it in the theaters, because it was
Yep.
just like it had the set pieces, like it had the dashing hero, like it had the love interest, and it just it felt like this was something you would go see in a theater where like the curtains would raise before the movie, right?
Yes. Yeah, there's elements of like Errol Flynn in this as well, right? Like of that sort of era.
Yeah, like the swashbuckler, like
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so to me that's why it felt like such a. And obviously I have some hindsight on this now because I'm older, but even
Mhm.
still, like I remember at the time feeling like, oh, this is a really cool movie, but it's not Blade, right? Like it's not The Matrix, like
It's not Blade. That's
it
true. Yeah.
like it's not the cool movies that are coming out at that time, but it's still a
Yeah.
really cool movie.
Yeah, it's almost cool and it's like aggressive uncoolness, right?
Right,
Like
yeah,
that's
it's
almost like
just
what's cool about it.
yeah, it's just like, yeah, this is what your parents liked. You probably watched this as
Yeah.
a kid. You'll probably like it.
So, okay, we're gonna turn to Joey now because it seems I think Joey's a little confused. And
Confused is a
and
strong word, but I guess not
uh,
entirely inaccurate.
yeah, I guess like I think you're sort of processing a lot of that same sort of reaction, right? That it's like it doesn't you had to be there kind of a thing. And I think that's a reasonable response. But go ahead, tell us what you initially thought
Well, I was saying
when you
to you a
first
little
showed.
bit before, between the intro and the episode, so you know some of this already, but the listener doesn't, Chris doesn't. But I'd never seen this movie. There's such love for this movie, not just on guests at this podcast or from guests at this podcast, but online. Like one of my
Yeah.
favorite, small shop, indie shop, movie thing, like Super Yaki does a lot of like Brendan Fraser, got it right, almost had it wrong again.
Fraser,
The mummy stuff, and like there's such a
It's
resurgence
actually
of
it's actually
this.
it's actually Fraser.
not Frazier.
But go ahead.
Oh my god. From 1998. Brendan Fraser.
Fraser, yeah.
So,
Frasier.
Fraser,
Fraser.
Zer. No, zh. Zer.
Brendan
Zuh.
Fraser
Zuh.
Crane.
Fraser,
It's not zh, it's zh.
Frasier.
Fraser,
It's
Yeah.
from the sparkling
Okay.
region of France.
So, I'd never seen this one, and I don't know why I haven't seen it because I've seen a lot of the movies, and I felt like to a certain extent, all the movies from 99 that I hadn't seen yet, that I wanted to see, I've already seen. So there's a certain sense of me, even though I know that it's wrong, I'm approaching the ones that I haven't seen with a little bit of trepidation, and I know
Mhm.
this movie means so much to so many people, and I watch it, and I'm just like, I don't get it really, and I guess that's the confusion you were talking about. And like, I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I don't think it's good. And I also, as someone who grew up watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, like 10 times a year or whatever, like
Yeah.
I don't know why I would, as someone without nostalgia for this movie, because again, even though that's apparently my role in this podcast is saying everything that people like about 99 is not actually good. Um, I don't want to, if you love this movie because you saw it in the theaters with your friends, and that's awesome. Like I wish that I had that experience. But as someone without that experience, I don't know why I would ever watch this movie instead of like Raiders or the Last
Mhm.
Crusade. Jesus, I can't get
Yeah.
any words right tonight.
The Lost Crusade.
Lost
Yeah.
Ark, Last Crusade. I don't know why I watched this over any indie movie because, or I don't like Temple Doom over the two indie movies because I
Wow.
just
It's
it feels like
aggressive.
it's aspiring to that and to other things, and I like those things better. But again, I don't think it's bad. It's just like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so again, I think a big part of my love for the movie, and probably a lot of other people's love for the movie, is the fact that if you didn't grow up with those essentially like classic golden age Hollywood movies being force fed into you because that was all your parents had, like,
Mm.
like I understand that there's a certain framework that goes into, appreciating a movie like that, right? Like you know the subconscious story beats. You know the tropes that they're drawing on. Like and it's not even like the tropes that they're drawing on. It's like you understand the scenery and the set pieces and the like this is you've seen this in other countless movies before. Like
Yeah,
you have the
yeah,
shootout, in the desert
yeah,
ruins.
yeah,
Like where it's just like, oh yeah, of course. Like of course that's gonna happen. Like of course you have, the snivelly, like not quite good guy, not quite bad guy, but he's gonna be a bad guy. Like
yeah,
it's there's a common frame of reference that if you don't speak that language, then you don't understand why it's there. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, no, sorry. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to not know that, right? Like, because
yeah.
it's just simply, it's not the environment that you grew up in. And for me, like, it was okay. Yeah, I understood. Here's what this movie is trying to say. It's almost like a love letter, right, to the classic golden age Hollywood movies. But
Absolutely.
everything dies. Like there's, we don't watch silent films anymore, or at least most normal people don't, because like those those are gone. Like those
Yeah.
aren't a thing anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like there's nothing wrong with being like, okay, I don't understand the frame of reference with which this movie was made,
Hmm.
and so it doesn't appeal to me. And yeah, I think, and that's why I say, like, I feel like it's kind of that cutoff point between, okay, here's the classic golden age, and let's be clear, a golden age doesn't necessarily mean that everything was good.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just everyone kind of looks back on it like, oh yeah, this was when stuff was good, but like it is kind of that cutoff point between, okay, here's how Hollywood used to make movies, and here's how they made movies going forward. And to me, that's what makes the movie so interesting, is that it really is kind of in that like liminal space of movies shifting from one thing to another.
And we talked about that, I think, briefly in the intro. The effects like look bad. And I wasn't sure if they looked bad because it was a choice or because they aged poorly or maybe a little bit of both. And it's just like, I think this is the kind of movie that if I watch it again, either this week in a year or 2 years or whatever, and sort of have the frame of reference and like know specific things that you two like about it, I would like more. But instead, I'm just like, this is just weird. Like I don't understand it. And like people love this, and I know that there's things about this that people love, but I just don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll make a confession and say that I didn't like it as much the first time I saw it as after it kind of sank in and I went back and watched it a second time. And I'm talking within, a year, right? I'm talking like by the year 2000, I'd already seen it twice. And the first time I saw it, I really enjoyed it as a fun sort of swashbuckling movie. But there was something about it that felt imitative, to the
Mm-hmm.
point that was detrimental. But then I was
Of Indiana
like,
Jones or just of a bunch of things?
well, then I kind of thought about it and read some things, like some commentary on it, and was like, I realized that what this movie was really trying to do was, because it was a Super Bowl ad movie, right? Like it was The Matrix had a Super Bowl ad, this did as well. And the Super Bowl ad was really expensive. And so it was pitched as a 1999 era big budget epic action movie, right? And it's not what it is. Like it
No,
comes
it's not.
across as like, right, it comes across as very like cobbled together. And I came to realize that like Indiana Jones and this movie aren't connected to each other. They're connected to what they're both paying homage to in different ways, right? Indiana Jones is a kind of grittier, more sort of grounded version of that, where Indiana through Harrison Ford is a lot more gruff, a lot more sort of like sardonic, whereas Rick in The Mummy, it's Errol Flynn through and through, right? He is the swashbuckling, sometimes wisecracking, but always purely heroic and good, right? Sort of like classic Hollywood action hero. And once I realized that it wasn't so much that it was trying to sort of be a different Indiana Jones as it was doing a different way of paying homage to those movies, my appreciation for it was so much larger. And I think the second one, which is also very good, doubles down on that, and like does it even, to like goes even further in, right, with that sort of over the top homage to the classic swashbucklers and adventure movies that Chris grew up with. So yeah, it took me a second too to kind of really get it, like what it was really going for, but I've always loved and appreciate what it's going for. And especially in a year like this one, where there's so much groundbreaking, there's so much risk taking, that you have this movie where its risks are that it's like trying to be very old, right? And like weird and simple and pure in this way that you just don't see anymore.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the way you described it really kind of crystallized in my mind, I think, how I view this movie compared to like Indiana Jones, in that to me, Indiana Jones is a very Reagan-esque type hero, right? He's the rugged individualist. He doesn't need anyone else.
Good
Whereas
call.
Brendan Fraser,
Fraser, not Frazier. If you say Frazier, I know where you live.
the Dwight D. Eisenhower hero, where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm doing this, but I have my friends. Like, I have my support group. Like, it's all of us in this together. and like,
That's
not
very
to get
nerdy,
super,
but it's good.
right? Very nerdy. Not to get super political, but it really does feel that way, where it's like, okay, yeah, Indy's gonna do it no matter what, but Brendan Fraser,
Let's Fraser.
like, he needs his support group. Like, he does not win without the people around him.
Well, yeah, like if it wasn't for the people around him, he would be dead like 20 minutes into this movie, right? Like,
Oh yeah, for sure.
he's literally saved from the gallows, almost like when it's too late. Like it's
Yep.
wild how much he depends and needs the people around him.
Right. And that's one of the things that is like so prevalent in those early Hollywood movies, is that like it isn't, yeah, you have the leading man, but that you have the supporting actors and actresses as well that are like, hey, if we're not here, you're dead. Like, and I feel like in terms of, relating it to movies like Indiana Jones, because that's probably the closest comparison, where it's like, okay, yeah, Indiana Jones, he has, he has his helper who's kind of absent-minded, and then he has the love interest, but other than that, like, who's there, right?
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah, and I'll be honest, Chris. We've had much more political hot takes than hot Eisenhower takes. I don't
Right?
think you're going to get in trouble for that.
All those people are dead.
Yeah, imagine you go to your book publisher. You're like, all right, here's a sequel to my book. What if Brendan Fraser or Gleason, whatever you want to say, is Dwight D. Eisenhower? They're like, get the fuck out. Who are you? What is this?
I'm going to go into a deep dive of the 1950s military-industrial complex versus the 1980s military-industrial complex.
But under the guise of 80s and 90s
Right?
action blockbusters.
Right?
You're right, though. There's a lack of cynicism here that is almost off-putting, right? For a modern movie, and just doesn't make sense in a post-Reagan, post-Clinton
it
kind of
feels
setting.
wholesome. Like, it feels unhealthily wholesome.
Yes, unhealthily wholesome is a good way to say it. It does.
Which
it
I
feels
feel like is normally my brand. Like, I wanted to love it. Like, I feel like the parts are there that I would like this. And I just never got into it. And I don't know what it was. I think, honestly, it was the pressure of, like, this felt like, for this podcast, the white whale for me. And, like, I know that it's crazy because we're only, like, this is episode, like, 14 or 15. Like, we're very, very early on. It's not like we've been building this up for years or whatever. But this was the one that, according to everyone, was just like, this is the one you're gonna love. And I didn't like, and I don't know why. I think I might have just been like, people are like, this, you're gonna love this movie, and I'm like, all right, cool. And then I felt the pressure, as dumb as that sounds.
Yeah, no, it's well, and that's fair to say too, is that like something that's overly hyped, like if it doesn't live up to the hype that was given to you, I mean, it's absolutely fair to say like, well, you made this out to be the next greatest thing since sliced white bread, but it was okay, and I feel kind of let down because I was expecting greater than okay.
I think something you said earlier, Chris, about sort of the way, like, I'm not surprised that Joey has this reaction because he's like in his 30s and has never seen it before. And I would not, if someone anybody my age, I think, would be able to sort of like remember what movies were like in the 90s and see how this is like radically different, right? In this like really
Yes.
fun and weird way.
Very
But
much
I
so.
think anybody younger than that, they'd be like, why would you like this movie? Unless it's like I start showing it to my kids at a young age and they
Right.
develop that relationship with it. So I do think there's a very specific window where like you're not going to get someone to appreciate this movie unless they see it at a young enough age or are old enough that they can be like, oh, I can see why in 99 this was a big deal because it's so old fashioned in this like really lovely throwback, warm, and just like, you know, non-cynical, non-Reagan-esque kind of way that even Indiana Jones isn't.
Right. Well, so I think that gets into actually a deeper discussion on the fact that like the media you consume is very heavily influenced on the previous media you have consumed and been exposed to,
Sure,
and
yeah.
that like think about what we're showing our children and what might be the media 20 years from now, right? Where it's like our children are struggling to explain TikTok memes and like, like what was popular on Twitter at this particular instance in time. It's like if you don't if you don't have the language to understand that, of course you're going to look at it and be like, okay, you like that thing, but that's not my thing. Like that wasn't
Yeah.
anything in my life that mattered. And I think that's perfectly fair to have, right? Because we grow older, like new generations come. Like it's okay to be like, yep, you don't understand the thing I liked and you have these totally weird things that you like, but that's cool too because those are the things
Yeah.
that you like. So yeah, no, like I totally understand if people don't like the movie the way I like the movie, because if you weren't in that specific cultural bubble, like your frame of reference, to quote The Big Lebowski, you're out of your fucking element, Donnie. Like, but that's really what it is, right? Like you don't have the frame of reference to understand what this means. And that's okay because you have your own frame of reference for other stuff that we don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry to go off on a tangent, but
No, that's a great point. I fully concur with what you're saying. Joe, I do want to pick apart like
Yeah.
some of the elements of this movie because you did sort of say like the parts are all kind of there, and I think one of the things that makes this movie, if nothing else, like a curiosity, is that you can imagine a movie like this that's very similar that gets made where the whole cast is nobodies. And the whole cast is just sort of just a bunch of like stand-in actors kind of doing their thing and having the adventure.
Well, not to disrupt you, like how far, like were these obviously like it's hard for me with the historical context of like not really
Yeah.
knowing the time period as well as I should, but like what did Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz what have they done before this?
Okay, so this is a good question. I will say that one of the people considered for the role was Tom Cruise. Who turned it down.
Interesting.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, they were all offered this role.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think it was, if I remember right, it was Summers who was like, I like Brendan Fraser and I want him for this role. Fraser had done, I'm pretty sure Gods and Monsters had already come out at this point. I'll double check on that. But, you know, School Ties.
That's the Ben Affleck movie, I think, right?
That's Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are both in that movie.
Yeah, I have not seen it, but I own the DVD because when we thought we were doing the Ben Affleck podcast, I bought that. Gods and Monsters came out in 98.
Yeah, okay, so Gods and Monsters is already out. So he's already gotten the movie that he has a ton of sort of critical acclaim for. Encino Man, Airheads, like
I love Airheads.
George of the Jungle had already come out.
No, And Encino Man, I think, was the first Brendan Fraser movie I'd seen.
Yeah, that was his
Which
sort
is
of big break. Even though it wasn't a great movie, people
right,
just
yeah.
thought he was fantastic
Yeah,
and
he was
just loved his
hilarious.
physical comedy. I think Dudley Do Right, even at this point, I'm not sure. I know that Summers had seen George of the Jungle and was really impressed with his physical comedy and just the way that he sort of has this both ability to be like the handsome debonair swashbuckler, but also just is very funny in the way that
Right.
he sort of presents himself and moves.
Well,
Um,
he's athletic too. Like the way he takes
right.
those falls and moves around, like he's legit an athletic person.
Yes. And he did a lot, if not all of his own stunts for this. So yeah, he just seemed like the movie really does, I think, make or break depending on how you feel about Fraser. But Rachel Weisz, this was her first big sort of American exposure. She'd done some British things before. John Hannah was a very well-known actor. He is a character actor. He was in
Four Weddings and a Funeral. I looked up, yeah,
Yep.
but I haven't seen that one either, so I don't know.
Yeah. So and so like Honor Vosloo we've talked about as someone who's sort of a genre actor. He was in the two Darkman sequels. He was in The Hard Target. And then Oded Fair, who is a very well respected Israeli, I think he's an Israeli actor. And so you have this international cast. It's much more diverse, I think, than movies of that time typically were.
Oh,
We
definitely
can
so.
talk. Yeah, we can talk about the casual racism here, but again, it's sort of par for the course with what it's trying to do.
It's colonialism.
Yeah, and there's some obviously whenever you're making a movie like this, you're going to fall into like Orientalism when you're dealing with Egypt and Egyptology and all that sort of thing, and like that. Yeah, that's sort of inescapable.
Right. Well, especially at that time too. Like it was just kind of like, yep, this is how you do things.
And the time that it's paying homage to, as we've sort of referenced, right? But the cast is like unnecessarily good and like unnecessarily game, right? And I think that's one of the things that makes this movie enduring is that it's such a bunch of great performances, and they all really seem to like know the assignment, right? Which I think is again part of like what sells the movie.
Yeah, no, I have no complaints on the cast. Like it's
Yeah.
the way they play their roles, like it's again, it sells that idea of like this is a classic Hollywood movie that
Right.
you have the lecherous drunk brother.
Right.
You have the naive sister, who just wants to discover things. You have the Bedouin adventures.
Yeah.
It's
and nobody
perfect.
seems to think it's a different movie. Like everybody knows what movie it is, and I think that's really rare, right? That you get people who are this good and accomplished as actors, and who are this all in.
So you're saying that this movie is good because most other movies are bad?
No,
Well,
that's not what I'm saying.
it's more it's good in that it could have very easily been a horrible movie.
Yeah, right.
And
Correct.
like the way that they approached it, like they bought I hate to use the word camp, but like this is a campy movie. Like
Absolutely.
it is full on like this is just nonsense happening. But the way they act their roles, it's amazing nonsense, and I love it. Like it's so good.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. Like I see why people like this, and there's not a thing. Like again, I can't point to a thing that like I think is bad. It's just so like I understand like if this works for you, like I understand totally why it would work for you because I do agree with everything you guys are saying. Like the people know what they're making. They're all on the same page. Like having seen all the Nicolas Cage movies, when I watched The Wicker Man, which is one of the ultimate punchlines on the internet for Nicolas Cage, and like he and Neil LaBute, the director, like thought they were making a dark comedy, and everybody else was not on the same page. And so that movie is just wild. It's just like, why does this feel so weird? It's because they're on like so when that happens and goes wrong or breaks bad, you're like, oh, I get like there's something very easy you can point to here. Like it's not that. Like that's not what I just don't know, but I do appreciate that everybody's just like, we're going to make a movie that like kind of feels of a time in like the 30s and the 60s and kind of today, but also not really kind of today.
Yeah.
It's well, so if I can put it a different way, this is if you were making a award-winning piece that you wanted Hollywood to recognize, but you were a huge freaking nerd. and all you cared about was the golden age of movies. Like, this is the movie you would make. There is a very small subset of people who understand. Sorry, not like, and that sounds dismissive, and I don't want it to sound dismissive, but like like a lot of my favorite movies are really like they're not good movies, but I appreciate what they were going for.
Well, because it feels like, I've seen this, in other genres and other types of medium or whatever, but like it's like people who grew up watching The Thing and then
Mhm.
got the chance to make The Thing and like wanted to make a good thing, but also wanted to pay homage to the thing that they loved watching growing up or whatever.
Right, exactly. But culture had passed them by. And like no
Mm.
one was gonna like their thing except for a very small section of society. And that's okay. Like they managed to convince a lot of executives to part with a lot of money
Yeah,
to make the movie
Right.
somehow
that
they're
they
like,
wanted
hey,
to make.
nobody cares about this, but Universal give us $100 million, or we're going to somehow make you almost $500
Yep.
million.
Yeah, and again, there is something genius about the way that this movie slotted itself in between The Matrix and The Phantom Menace, and with just enough time for it to sort of fill that void and make a gajillion dollars in so doing. Like, there's something very deliberate about this movie that whenever there's something that I kind of roll my eyes about, I'm like, yeah, but they meant to do this. Like, this is all sort of
Yeah.
so intentional, right?
Yep.
That like on every level, when you talk about the 10 years of development hell that it took to get this movie until Steven Summers was like, what if we just fucking throw everything at it and go crazy? And then people are like, that sounds great, let's do that. And he's like, cool, give me up $80 million and I'll get it done. Something's just so delightful about that I, again, it's just it's not going to happen ever again. Like, it's just the market's not there.
I think my favorite part about the movie that like describes the movie is when Brendan Fraser is having the shootout in the ruins.
Let's Fraser.
Near the beginning, and you just see people like diving over the walls.
Yes.
Yes. It's like the body count is rising close to triple digits.
The gun physics of this movie make no goddamn sense, and it's great because it's like
whatsoever. But it fits.
People are just firing guns and random people are dying as a result.
Yeah.
It's
like it's fantastic. Like it doesn't have to make sense.
No. Doesn't have to all make sense, Joey. It doesn't have to be the Tom Cruise version of the Mummy every time.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that? Should we talk about the Tom Cruise version of the Mummy?
Let's get to that in a second. There's one more thing about this movie that I also kind of want to point to that I really love, and again, having gone back in part because of the Monsters That Made Us on the Cage Club Podcast Network, which just goes back and looks at all the Universal monster movies. And having gone back and revisited some of those last year, and then we will do so again this year around Halloween time. One of the things that, like, when I rewatched The Mummy most recently, that I was like, oh, that's kind of a nod to the Universal monster movie thing. Is like a lot of stuff just happens in like random rooms. Like there's a lot of just people talking in rooms in this movie, and you never see that anymore. Like action taking place inside like of a bedroom, and you're like, what the fuck? And it's great. And it's very classic. But
how did we get here? Who knows?
Yeah.
Unleash
and like
the
really
scarabs.
important plot points will be talked about in this like random room where there's like a window where the monster comes through, and you're like, this is great. A lot of the original Bela Lugosi Dracula like plays out that way, and there's something that feels very kind of deliberate and homage to those movies, which by like Summers full on set, like he loved those movies and like used that as a lot of the blueprint for how this movie plays out. And again, like if you've never seen the original Dracula and you watch it now, like it's very weird. Like it's like, why did people go see this?
Because that's all there was.
But there's also something just really wonderful about it. Well, that's true too. But like a lot of it still really works in like a way that is stunning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people who haven't seen them the first time, the Universal monster movies, are often like, wait, that's it? It's over? Like that it's only been on for an hour and it's over already? Like what is happening? There's something very sort of abrupt about them, but I love that sort of lo-fi, just like stuff happening in a bedroom that you just never see, right, in a big epic movie anymore.
Right. Well, and I think a big part of that is that the movies of today have built so much on foundations that were laid, 90
Absolutely.
years ago. right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
they don't need to do that anymore because it's implied that like, okay, here is the language that we all understand because it's such a pervasive part of our culture that
Yeah.
like, okay, you expect it to be something more than that. And again, that's why I think that the Mummy, it really is kind of like a cutting off point of like, okay, here's one of the last like classic movies, and past that point, it's not to say it's better or worse, but like things are different past that point. Like we're now into
Yeah.
the like postmodern age of movies. So take it for what it's worth.
Joey, real quick before we move on to Tom Cruise, we do have to talk about that because I think
Yeah.
it's worth having your expert voice on it. Brendan Fraser, I think Chris and I both agree that he makes every movie he's in better.
Yeah, he
I think
does.
that's just like a true thing about everything that he's in, partly because he's always been so game. And again, I don't think this movie, in spite of how much I just admire Stephen Sommers just wearing his heart in his sleeve and going all in here, I don't think that works without Brendan Fraser. I do think this is one of my favorite roles of his. Chris, I don't know if you've seen the sequel. We'll talk about that maybe in a second. But as purely a Brendan Fraser performance, right? As doing this sort of both homage to Indiana Jones and not, and being sort of that, Errol Flynn's kind of action star. Like, what do you think of Brendan Fraser in this movie, Joey?
I think he's good. He's the kind of like he's like again like an internet folk hero now that I
Yeah.
appreciate. Like I don't want to take that away from anybody. I just don't necessarily know if I get it. And I haven't
Mm.
seen a ton of his movies. Like I saw George of the Jungle, I think maybe growing up, and I was just telling the story to another friend, but a lot of my friends in my fantasy baseball league all love the same kind of comedies that I just didn't see in the 90s and 2000s. I'm sure the same movies that you guys love and grew up on or whatever. And I'd basically seen none of them. And so I did a really deep dive to watch a lot of them to very mixed results. But like one that they all loved was Airheads. And so I was very nervous because I was like, if I don't love this, they're all going to really hate me. And then I watched it and I loved it. And I
It's
don't
so
know
good.
why I love it exactly, but I loved Airheads. And so I do have in my heart love for Brendan Fraser from that movie, at least specifically. But I think he's really good in this, but I didn't come in like, ooh, a new Brendan Fraser movie. Like I'm really excited for that. Like
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have that kind of like baggage the same way that and I mean that like in a good way or a bad way, whatever. Like I would with, with Tom Cruise into the Mummy. Like I had seen every Tom Cruise movie. And so I'm like, okay, here's what he's bringing to this thing or whatever, and going from there. But I like him in this. I think he's exactly the kind of like generic in a good way, affable, handsome,
Yeah.
and kind of like a
Yeah.
Nathan Fillion type before Nathan Fillion.
So I do have to say, so Joey, have you seen Bedazzled?
No. I think that was no, I don't think that I
Is him and
have.
Elizabeth Hurley. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I love The Mummy, but Bedazzled is my favorite Brendan Fraser movie.
Okay, I'll add that to my list.
Like it is, and
Yeah.
I will admit I'm somewhat biased because my wife and I went to go see it in the theater at the time we were just dating. But like it is hilarious. Like the amount of roles he takes on and just commits to playing. Like oh man, I will still watch it if it's on TV.
Yeah. It's a great one. I agree. I also like Airheads is my favorite Adam Sandler movie. Like everything works with Airheads. Like all of the actors who are in that, it makes the best of every single one of them. Like including Chris Farley and like Steve Buscemi. That's a fantastic movie. I actually remember when I worked for a certain media company, I had to go see Journey to the Center of the Earth for free to review it for said media company. And, like it was so much goddamn fun, mostly because of Brendan Fraser, right? Like who is elevating this kid's sort of action spectacle movie into something else.
Because he commits.
He does. And he's just having a fucking ball and just like having such a blast. And like there's something so infectious about that I think this is why people have missed him so much over the last decade and a half or so that he's been largely absent, and also why people are just so excited to have him back, because there is just this fact that like you can take any movie he's in, take him out of it, and it is a worse movie, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good the movie is on the surface. He just makes everything he's in better. And I don't know, people just respond to that. It's not something you can just sort of, it doesn't happen very often, right? That you have a
Well,
performer like
so,
that.
so to segue into the Tom Cruise Mummy
Here we
movie,
go.
like
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the things that makes Tom Cruise such an enduring actor, despite his craziness, is that
Oh, absolutely.
like when
100%.
he commits to a bit, he is committing to the
And he's
bit.
100%.
honestly never not committing.
No,
No, he's never phoned a damn thing in his life. Yeah.
Chris, have you seen the Tom Cruise Mummy?
I have not, but I have seen enough Tom Cruise movies to know who
Right.
Tom Cruise is.
Okay.
And to get a sense of what that movie's like, right? Yeah.
There's gonna be a lot of teeth clenching, a lot of running.
Falling out of airplanes, which
Yep.
we know from the trailer is something that happens in that movie. So, Joey, as the person who has, because you are a Tom Cruise completionist,
Yep.
Who has seen the Tom Cruise Mummy,
I saw the Mummy in theaters and then again at home.
Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
Which is the superior mummy?
Oh, that one's not good.
Yeah.
I think
That's
it
right.
could have been good though, because I think it does interesting things. So Tom Cruise, for years, was on a quest to find another franchise. That he had Mission Impossible and he wanted something else. And I don't know if this was ever like overt or outspoken, but he kept trying to get something started. And now he has, 2 Top Guns, maybe more to come, who knows. He had the 2 Jack Reachers, but that got taken away. Like he's not that anymore. He's doing
not
another.
tall.
Yeah, exactly. Like he was never actually Jack Reacher, but they still cast him as whatever. There's a second Edge of Tomorrow coming out, but like the Dark Universe was gonna be this thing, and I felt like the reason it kind of suffered, I think, is that instead of doing like an Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss, which I think is genuinely incredible, and I love that movie so much, where it's just like we're gonna take a classic property and do a thing and tell a great story, and if this is the start of something cool, what the Mummy did was just like, all right, we're going to have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in here. Also Russell Crowe, another guy who commits to things, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that they tried to do too much. I think that suffered from the Marvelization of movies. It's like, well, this needs to not only be a Mummy movie, but also kick off this thing that we're announcing. We're saying we're starting a cinematic universe with this movie that is not necessarily tonally or stylistically or, anachronistic or whatever. Like, nothing is at all. It's like, this isn't your daddy's Mummy. And also the Mummy's a girl now. It's like, good luck with, like, she's great. Like the Mummy is great. Sofia Boutella is great as the Mummy, but just like they took such swings and tried to do too much. And I think that parts of it work. It was kind of messy. I wouldn't say see it, but I don't think it necessarily deserves like scorn or ridicule. I think there are worse Tom Cruise movies. I think maybe a couple. And there's definitely worse other movies that came out that year for sure.
So the way you describe it, it sounds a lot to me like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
That's fair. Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
Yep. Like there's a lot going on, and if you don't know the backstory, you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
I think you made a really, like, I'm glad you said the Marvelization thing, because I think this is a good time to like praise Kevin Feige, because I think a lot, if you look at like the DCEU and what a disaster that's been, and the attempt of Universal to make a sort of like, let's turn our monster movies into basically the new MCU, you have everything going for you, but you don't have Kevin Feige. And if you don't have Kevin Feige like as a singular visionary to like make this whole fucking thing work, right, where you can pull WandaVision and She-Hulk into the same universe as like Thor and Iron Man, and all of these properties, and just weave this whole thing together, it's not an easy thing to do. And just because you have a bunch of like name brand franchises doesn't mean you can just fucking try and mimic that and do it, as basically everybody who's tried has learned.
Yeah,
right?
it's the same thing with DC. And like I feel like that, for as much as I talked about the Fast and Furious over on Too Fast, Too Forever, like they've both suffered from the Marvel thing, but also like been like the almost like the main holdout. Like they don't do that, even though they do it in certain ways, but they're not like, let's do this and this and this. Like they do set up future movies and they do try to like explicitly like exploit like a global whatever. But like you look at so many different things that like all the biggest failed conglomerates, like content conglomerates, were all trying to do the thing that like the MCU took like close to a decade to actually do. Like they made the Avengers, but like even that was just like, all right, so we have like these like 4 or 5 movies leading up to this one thing, but then like it wasn't even clear after that, right? Like it still took years, as opposed to like DC's like, all right, we're doing this, and then we're gonna do in Justice League, and then now we're caught up. It's like, well, that's not really how it works, but like, good luck.
It's like for me personally, having seen the Marvel movies, from the first Iron Man, like again, even before that, Blade, right? Like Blade is a Marvel movie, even though it came out fucking like 10 years before everything. Like the thing that always struck me about the Marvel movies versus the DC superhero movies is that like the Marvel movies felt like they wanted to have fun,
Yes.
whereas
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
DC movies were just like, oh, we're fucking gritty, like, and it's just like, just make it fun.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the big difference between the Mummies, is that like the Dark Universe is also like, I don't know where the exact name came from, like the etymology, but like it just feels like this is the serious, like this is, we're dark and we're heavy, like, and it's, as opposed to this, we're just
Hence
like, hey,
boring.
we're basically swashbuckling pirates in 1920s Egypt, right? Like it's a very different tone.
I think to
Right.
that point, well, first of all, the only time this has worked is in Shane Black's The Monster Squad, right? Where you got all these guys together and to make a movie that functions and is a classic and wonderful. But to your point, Joey, I think that's exactly right. Where whether or not this worked for you, like it worked, and it worked because Stephen Summers' approach is basically like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The whole thing with like Dracula Untold and all of this other, like, I don't fucking care. Just like give me an awesome old school Dracula movie and an awesome old school mummy movie, and like, sure, make it a modern movie, but like give me that old school vibe and I'm in, right? If you can do that right. I don't need it dark. I don't need it modernized. I don't need it like, gloomy and broody the way that like fucking Man of Steel is. I don't need any of that shit. Do not give me Zack Snyder's, Universal monsters. I don't fucking care, right? Like I want like the thing that worked about the MCU is that it took that approach. It understood for the first time that people have been reading and loving these characters for decades, and you don't have to fuck with them. Just like make a good movie with these characters and it will work. And I have not seen the Tom Cruise one, but like everything I know about the dark universe, whatever, is it seems to fall into that same trap.
It's well, so it needs to be campy, but it needs to be campy in a way that's modern. Like, and I
Yeah.
feel that's what the Marvel movies have captured in terms
Yes.
of like the heroes are gonna win, right? Like things are gonna turn out for the good guys,
Yeah.
and you're there for the ride. Like it's a fun amusement ride, and it, I'm sorry, like I know I love graphic novels. I love comic books. Like I love the idea that you could tell serious messages within these mediums. But in terms of like blockbuster entertainment, that if you're gonna tell a serious message, then there like you gotta make sure that the camp is there and that
Yes.
people understand it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Like, if you're gonna make a drama, then make a fucking drama, right? Like,
Well, to your point, like it's what I sometimes call the Buffy rule, which is like the reason that Buffy the Vampire Slayer worked is that it was absurd and over the top and campy, but every character in that world took it seriously.
right? It's good
And
writing.
yeah, and that's why the MCU works so well, is because you can have a god from Asgard in the same story as Iron Man and
As a
Captain
fucking
America.
raccoon.
Right, because you're having fun as you're watching
Right.
it, and it's absurd, but all the characters are in. They are taking it, the stakes are real for them. They are taking it seriously, and they are not sort of being like, "Ooh, look how," like they comment on the fucking talking raccoon like anybody would, but not so much that they're like, "Now we got to kill this guy who's trying to destroy half of the universe," right? Like it's still, the stakes are still real. And the audience can wink at it. I feel like with the DCU and what they tried to do with the Dark Universe is they need it to be gritty and like post 9/11y, and it's like, no, I don't need that at all. Like, I don't need 9/11 references in Batman. Like, thank you, you can pass. Like, no thanks. I don't want it. I will take it seriously if you take it seriously. I don't need 9/11.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're trying to make a movie to win awards when
Yeah,
if you want to make a movie to win awards, you don't make a superhero movie.
that's Zack Snyder's whole vibe to me. It's like, I want awards. Just give me awards.
Right.
I will put another fucking like dark filter on this lens. Give me a goddamn award, please.
I will, not that this is a Zack Snyder podcast, but I will go to bat for him insofar as that I think he is amazing when he makes a 4-hour movie. I think the Ultimate Watchmen cut and the 4-hour Justice League are both incredible, like genuinely amazing.
Okay, fair.
But he can't make a short movie because he just has too much story to tell. So whenever he wants, I don't know that's a compliment. I don't know what that is.
He needs an editor.
He has, yes, probably.
Yeah,
but he has the talent in him. It's just he likes to make things real somber, and like he doesn't want you to have a good time. I think it's something that Chris was saying before, right? It's just like, it should be fun. You're seeing Batman and Superman punch each other. Like, it should be fun. It shouldn't be like, oh, your mother, Martha, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So,
right. It should be kids, like kids with their plastic toys on the living room floor, smashing them against each other.
That's why I liked Space Jam 2, which is a crazy thing to say. I know that, but I'm like, this movie feels like me with my box of toys.
Yeah,
having fun.
Yeah,
and everybody's just like, this is IP. I'm just like, yeah, it is, but like, it feels like a kid playing with toys,
right?
just that's what it was. Together. It was literally, that was the movie, right? It was literally that. HBO was like, look at all this shit we got. And it's like, let's fucking play with it and have it fight each other.
That's also what the movie's about, because like Don Cheadle plays the algorithm, and he talks. Right. So like, they're in on the joke. It's just that other people like just wanted to hate it. So I don't know.
I thoroughly enjoyed the 90 minutes I spent watching that movie and have not thought about it since. Yeah. But yeah, I'm with you. Okay, we got a little far off topic, but that's fine.
We can talk about soccer again. You want to talk about soccer?
Yes.
Let's not talk about soccer. Joey, as we discussed, Chris has already answered our two standard questions. So we have prepared two, I believe, right? Two new ones for Chris to answer. So take it away.
Again, Chris, no wrong answers, no pressure. If you message John in a couple of days, you're like, oh, I have a better answer, like, that's fine too. But given that this is October, we are recording in October, this comes out in October. Do you have a favorite horror movie, a favorite spooky season movie that you would like to recommend? Just something, your favorite scary movie.
That's a tough one.
Do you like scary movies?
Or again, just like a recent one you loved, or like someone that like an unsung favorite, or anything like that. Just a great horror movie that you love.
That's so like, it's difficult for me because I've been scared at various movies in various points of my life. Like,
yeah, me too. Yeah,
right. Like so it's so hard to hone in on a definition of horror when it's like, okay, it's totally based around who you are in that moment. And like, that being said, like, as a kid, I watched the original Candyman. That fucked me up a bit.
Great. It's great.
Okay.
It's great.
Okay. Yeah.
Really good. It really left me not wanting to look at mirrors for a while. Aliens, the scene at the very end when the alien queen essentially like bisects who's the android guy, forget his name.
Oh, Bishop.
Yeah, Bishop. Yeah, that's who it is. Like that, I don't know why, but as a kid, like I kind of crept in on my parents watching the movie and kind of like watched that part, and then like had nightmares for weeks.
And it's like white android.
Yeah, the white goo is just like spraying everywhere.
Absolutely.
like Ridley's in the freaking power suit. Like, oh man, yeah, that one stuck with me. So yeah, like it's, and then Signs. Signs is actually freaking creepy as hell. Like,
interesting.
Like, so after you've seen the movie, it's not creepy, but when you watch the movie, it's like for as much shit as M. Night Shyamalan deservedly gets, like that was a really well done movie in terms of just framing the like, holy crap, there's a silhouette on the barnyard roof. Like, oh, there's a weird creature just kind of like walking through the alley. Like, And
then
then
that one shot that you just referred to there is like the one that I always have stuck in my head,
yeah,
right?
right?
I that's
Like
the
it freaking
one part of the movie
sticks
I
with you.
remember. It does.
Like,
It's a
because
great
it
shot.
looks so natural and it's
Yeah.
so off that like
Mhm.
that is just horrific. But then you get to the rest of the movie, it's like Earth is 80% covered in water. What the fuck were you thinking?
Yeah.
So yeah, please ignore that part. Go watch Signs if you haven't watched it.
Okay, so they go watch one of these scary movies and they're like having nightmares and they're like, Chris, why did you do this to me? I need another recommendation. You are a multi-hyphenate, but you are, in my heart, first and foremost, you are an athlete, a punter.
NFL legend.
Do you have an NFL legend? Do you have a
I don't know
favorite?
about legend.
I think legend. You're the. Do you think you're more or less famous than former Giants linebacker Harry Carson?
Oh man, I don't even know who Harry Carson is.
Because I stood next to him in Disney World watching fireworks one time. So you guys are the only two NFL players I think I've ever talked to. So I was going to say you're the most famous, but I don't know if it. You are though. You're number one in my heart. Do you have
No. Okay. To be fair, you need to ask Harry Carson. Do you know who Chris Kluwe is?
Maybe. So anyway, tangent aside, so they're like, Chris, you just fucked me up with that movie. I need a good thing, and maybe it could be a scary. I don't know. Are there scary sports movies? Do you have a favorite sports movie?
Unnecessary Roughness.
Okay.
Really?
Okay.
Yep.
With Kathy Ireland?
Yep. Foot meatball.
I had forgotten that movie existed.
It's so bad, and I love it so much.
Who's in it aside from her?
Wait, so Necessary Roughness, it's Scott Bakula, Robert Loggia,
Okay.
Harley Jane Kozak, Larry Miller, Hector Elizondo, Sinbad, Rob Schneider, Jason Bateman.
It's so shitty.
Kathy
Ireland is like
Kathy
12th
Ireland.
build.
Yep. She's the kicker.
Peter Navy Tuiasosopo, who's been in a bunch of things.
Yep.
Yeah, Evander Holyfield, Dick Butkus.
Yep. Do they have actual football players?
Chris Berman is this former announcer? Chris Berman? Sure
yes,
is.
he's the announcer.
Yep.
Yep. All right.
So I will say, Necessary Roughness probably a deep cut.
Yeah, justify that, please. Like, what are we talking?
I saw it as a kid. It stuck with me. What can I say?
Fair enough.
But if you need to unfuck your head and you need a sports movie, Major League is probably what I would recommend.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I got a guy on the other line with some white walls.
Similar vein to Necessary
What do you
Roughness?
think? What do you think of Major League 2? There was a great debate in one of my text threads recently about Major League 2 and whether or not.
So I put Major League 2 in the same category as Anchorman 2. Like it's okay, but it's not the original.
So it doesn't make the first one worse, but it's not necessarily good. It's not,
right. Yeah. It's
okay.
like
not
you
necessary.
Yeah, you could watch the first one and be completely happy. You can watch the second one and be like, all right, that's a thing. It doesn't make the first one awful, but like I'd be okay with only knowing the first one.
Well, speaking of sequels, and before we go, have you seen any of the Brendan Fraser Mummy sequels?
I think I saw the one with The Rock as the Scorpion King, right?
Like the one that the Mummy that he's in, or the Scorpion King starring The Rock?
Is he in the Mummy 3 and then Scorpion King is basically Mummy 4? Is that how that works?
No, there's no Mummy. So okay, no, there's the Mummy 2 with him as basically a cameo, and then really bad CGI.
Right, and then they go into the Scorpion King,
and then the Scorpion King spin-off starring him, which is a separate movie about his story. And then the Mummy 3 is with Jet Li, which takes place like in China. It's like a Chinese mummy.
I know I saw the Rock spinoff because I remember the CGI was big. Horrible.
Yeah,
it was so bad.
The Scorpion King movie did pretty well. Like it was.
It did, but the CGI was still really bad.
It was better than it was with him at the end of the second one, where it's like, what are we doing?
I think I may have seen the second one on like HBO or something because I don't remember seeing it in the theaters.
Wait, so
how many? Because I really like the first one.
How many of these movies is The Rock in?
He's in 2 and the Scorpion King. And then Fraser comes back like 10 years later for the Dragon Emperor, and it's not great. And then there's a bunch of like direct-to-video Scorpion King spin-offs. It's,
Yeah, I haven't seen
the
any of those.
cartoon series. Yeah. I just remember like the only reason I remember the second one and enjoying the second one was that was a big Rachel Weisz year for me, because that was also the year that About a Boy came out, and that's where I was like, that's when I fell in love with Rachel Weisz.
How could you not fall in love with her with the first Mummy?
I don't know. I mean, I really liked her, but like I associated Evelyn as a character more than like Rachel Weisz as an actor. I didn't really know who she was outside of that, and she looks very different.
I feel like she's giving Kate Beckinsale in this movie a little bit.
I agree. Yes,
and I mean that as a compliment because I love Kate Beckinsale.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so I saw her. I almost pictured it's almost like Gina Davis, which again may be dating me.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? Like kind of the wholesome, like ingenue.
Yep.
Yeah, that's Which
it was such a sort of like, it was a type of performance, and it was like very much in the character, and like there's not a lot of like Rachel Weisz in that, and it wasn't until I think the second one where she's a lot more like down to earth in the second one.
Okay.
Because I think she and Rick are married at that point, and like so you get sort of more of the depth of that character. And
wait, so how many of these Mummyverse movies are good?
I think the first two. I think the first two are good. Yeah,
The Mummy and The Mummy Returns.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think the third one's fine. Rachel Weisz is not in it, but Fraser is, and Jet Li is, and like, yeah, there's some entertainment value there.
And you're saying that came out after The Scorpion King?
It was like 10 years.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, it was like probably like 2007 or 8. Like it was like 5 or 6 years later, like once the whole thing had sort of run its course, and it was just sort of last ditch attempt to cash back in on it. But I also think if you guys you probably have seen Moon Knight. I feel like there's a lot of like, homage to the Mummy there as well, and that sort of whole genre, and just does that very, very well.
I do. I still think, again, this is maybe just my like not my cup of tea. I didn't love that either. Like I kind of want. I feel like there's so much cool stuff that references like ancient Egypt and all of this, like, literally hundreds, if not thousands of years of like history. And I just like, I haven't found a creator or a director to do something the way that I want it to be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like Robert Eggers of, The Lighthouse and The Northman The Witch would absolutely fucking crush. And he's also doing Nosferatu now, would crush an ancient Egypt something, but maybe one day.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is that, Chris, I know you said we don't watch silent films anymore, but if you ever get a chance to see Nosferatu with like a live accompanist on organ, highly recommend doing that.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So I will say there's a difference between silent movies versus silent movies with the orchestra pit.
Sure.
Making it happen.
And like, bring that back, people. Come on. I want like a live score to my movies again. And an intermission and like curtain closing and all that good stuff.
So that's how we get our orchestras to become relevant again. Just start showing silent movies.
I mean, they've done the whole thing where like they've done like Lord of the Rings live, where like they will play live orchestra to Lord of the Rings, and like they did a similar thing with Star Wars once, and like it's not a bad idea. I'm all about it. I'd go see The Mummy with like a live, Jerry Goldsmith score being played by an orchestra as you're watching it.
It would get the youth interested in both classical music as well as classical movies.
Let's get the youth to watch a movie that we just admitted that like young people wouldn't like anymore. To listen to an orchestra that they don't care about.
They can put it on TikTok. It'll be 20 seconds.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. It's getting late here, but this has been awful lot of fun. Chris, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk.
Thank you, Chris. And I hope that you didn't have a case of the Mondays today.
Joey's doing this thing where he previews our next movie. I think you can figure out what it is. Anyway, to the rest of you guys, happy spooky season. Go watch The Mummy if you haven't seen it.
And watch out for frogs.
And we'll see you next time.
That's Fraser, not Frazier. If you say Fraser, I know where you live.